I have kept a book my whole life that isn't about money. Folks around Coldwater think old Amos Kettle just shoes horses and mumbles to himself, and they're not wrong about the mumbling. But every night I sit by the stove and I write down who owes what to who, not in dollars, in kindnesses, in cruelties. A man buys the widow Hale's firewood and doesn't say so. That goes in the book. A man raises his hand to something smaller than him. That goes in too, on the other side of the page in the column I try not to fill. For 11 years I had a page for Della Tanner, and every entry on it broke my heart a little more, because every one of them was a debt owed to her that this town never paid. I'm going to tell you about the winter that account finally came due, about a woman who learned to smile so the smile hid the rest of her face, about a man off the mountain who didn't say 10 words the whole time but saw everything, saw it the way you see weather coming, before the sky even changes. I don't know yet if I did right. That's the honest truth, and I've never told this part to a living soul. But I know what I wrote in my book that spring, and I know my hand was shaking when I wrote it. So sit close, let the fire get low. Because some people spend years praying somebody will notice, and give up before the somebody comes. And some somebodies come off a mountain in the dead of February, smelling of pine and cold, and change the whole shape of a life without ever raising their voice. The bay mare threw her near-fore shoe on a Tuesday, and that's how it started, though I didn't know it was a start. Most bad things and most good things look like ordinary Tuesdays until much later. I had the mare's leg cradled between my knees, my back to the door when the light changed. That's how I knew someone had come in, not a sound, just the gray February daylight going dim across the straw as a body filled the doorway. My forge was ticking. My hands smelled of hoof and hot iron. I said without turning, "Be a minute," the way I say it 40 times a day. "No hurry, Mr. Kettle." Della Tanner's voice. Soft and pitched careful, the way she always pitched it, like a person carrying a full cup across a crowded room, watching it the whole way so it wouldn't spill. I set the mare's hoof down and straightened, and my old knees told me about it. "Mrs. Tanner." I wiped my hands on my apron, though it didn't do much. "What can I do you for?" She was standing just inside the door with her basket over her arm, and she'd worn the blue coat, the good one, buttoned to the throat against the cold. Pretty woman, Della. Not the kind that stops a room, the quieter kind, the kind you don't notice is beautiful until she's laughing, and then you can't figure how you missed it. Except she didn't laugh much anymore. Somewhere in the last few years the laughing had gone out of her, and I'd watched it go the way you watch a lamp burn down, slow, so you can't say which night it finally went dark. "Royce sent me for the wagon grease," she said, "and to ask were the geldings ready." "Ready Thursday." I moved toward the shelf, and that's when I saw it. She'd reached up to tuck a piece of hair off her face, a small thing, a woman's habit, and the sleeve of the blue coat slid back an inch. Just an inch. And on the pale inside of her wrist, where the skin is thin and shows everything, there was a band of bruise going, the sick greens and yellows of an old hurt healing over a new one. 4 marks, spaced like fingers. She saw me see it. "I want to tell you I did something. I want to tell you my whole life that I said a word, asked a question, offered a thing. But I have to tell it true or there's no point telling it. What I did was look away. Fast, like I'd seen something private, which I suppose I had. I got very busy with the greased tin. And she pulled her sleeve down slow, and neither of us said a thing about it, and the shame of that, my shame, the town's shame, all of it, I carried out of that livery, and it followed me for weeks. That night I opened my book and I sat with the pen a long time. Under Della Tanner's page I finally wrote, saw it plain today. Did nothing. Coward. And I underlined the last word twice, which is a thing I have never done before or since. Now about Royce Tanner. Royce ran the freight line out of Coldwater, the ox teams and the big wagons that hauled ore down the pass to the railhead and hauled goods back up. Good business. He'd built it up from 2 mules and a mean streak, and the mean streak he kept, the way some men keep a dog they've quit feeding because it still frightens strangers. Big man. Handsome, if you like the kind of handsome that's mostly jaw. Bought a round at the Antler on Saturdays and shook hands hard and looked you in the eye. And the men in town liked him fine because he was generous when watched. But I'd shod his horses 11 years, and you learn a man from his horses. His animals flinched. Every one of them the same way, a full-body flinch when a hand came up too fast near their heads, even a hand offering a carrot. Horses don't lie. A horse that flinches like that has been struck, and struck by someone it can't get away from, and after long enough it stops expecting anything else. Della had come to Coldwater a bride, 11 years back, off a stage from somewhere east, and I remember she'd had color in her then, and a way of tipping her head back when something delighted her. I remember thinking Royce Tanner had done better than he deserved. I remember she planted roses along the freight office fence that first spring, and Royce dug them up that fall because they were, he said, womanish foolishness taking up ground. I remember she didn't plant anything after that. The town knew. That's the part I have to make you understand. It wasn't a secret. Doc Ferris had set her wrist 1 year and her ribs another, and written both times in his book fell. The Reverend had married them and would, I don't doubt, have buried her the same way, sorrowful and useless. The women at the mercantile talked with their mouths in a hard line and did nothing, because what was there to do? A wife belonged to her husband, and the law and the church both said so. And a woman who left had no place to go and no coin to go there, and a name that followed her ruined. So we all kept our little books. I mean that near literal. Everyone in Coldwater had a page for Della Tanner in the private ledger of their conscience, and everyone let the debt run, and everyone told themselves the same lie, which was, it isn't my business, and anyhow it's not so bad, and anyhow what could I do? 3 lies stacked. I told them to myself so long they'd worn smooth as river stones. The mountain man came down the second week of February, in the worst cold of that whole winter. His name was Ansel. I never did learn a second name, and I don't think Coldwater ever did either. He was just Ansel, the trapper from up past Elk Ridge, who ran a line of traps through the high country and came down maybe 3 times a winter to trade pelts for powder, coffee, salt, and whatever else a man can't make out of snow and solitude. Big fellow. Not tall so much as made of more than other men, thick through the chest and the hands, with a beard gone iron gray and pale eyes set deep, the kind of eyes that have spent years looking at long distances and reading small signs in the snow. Quiet the way deep water is quiet. You had the sense there was a great deal going on down under, and none of it in a hurry to come up. He'd been coming down 3 times a winter for 6 years, and I doubt he'd said 50 words in town the whole while. He wasn't simple, and he wasn't strange, whatever the children thought. He was just a man who'd learned that most of what people say doesn't need saying, and had quit saying it, and found he could live that way. He brought his mule to me that second week to have her shod, and while I worked he did the thing he always did, which was watch. Not rude, just attentive. Present in a way most folks aren't. Most folks, when they wait, they go somewhere in their heads. Ansel stayed put, right there in his own eyes, watching the fire and the iron and the street through my open door with the same steady attention. And it happened that Della Tanner came by that afternoon, for the wagon grease again, or the thread, I forget which errand Royce had sent her on this time. She came in soft as ever, said her soft, careful hello, and did her small business and left. 3 minutes, maybe. And in those 3 minutes she reached up that same habit, tucking the hair, and this time it wasn't the wrist. This time the good blue coat's collar shifted, and there was a mark high on her throat, just under the ear, that a scarf hadn't quite covered. I looked away again, old coward me. But Ansel didn't look away. I felt it more than saw it, felt the quality of his stillness change. He didn't move. He didn't gawk. His face didn't do anything a stranger would have read. But I'd been watching that man wait in my livery for 6 winters, and I knew his stillness the way I knew my horses, and this was a different stillness. This was the stillness of a thing that has just decided to move and is only waiting to learn which way. When Della had gone, he watched the empty doorway a moment. Then he turned those pale eyes on me, and he said, and this is nearly the whole of what he said to me that whole winter, so I remember it exact. "Her man do that." Not a question. I felt my face heat. I busied my hands. "Ansel, it isn't." "Her man do that," he said again, softer, and this time it wasn't to me at all. He was just saying it out loud so the fact of it would be in the world, spoken, no longer a thing everyone knew and nobody said. I didn't answer. My silence answered. He nodded once, slow, the way a man nods when a track in the snow tells him where the deer has gone. Then he paid me for the mule's shoes, exact coin, and went out into the cold, and I stood there with a debt in my book so old and so heavy I could hardly lift the pen that night. I need to tell you what kind of help I expected, so you understand why what happened next was not that. I expected, if I expected anything, that Ansel might do what men do, which is to say I half thought he might find Royce Tanner in the Antler and put those big trappers' hands on him and settle it the old bloody way. Part of me, God forgive me, wanted it. There's a meanness in wanting a wicked man beaten. I know because I've felt it, and it's a poor cousin to justice, close enough to fool you. Ansel did no such thing. What Ansel did was become, very quietly, a fixture. He didn't go back up the mountain. His pelts were traded, his supplies bought. He had no earthly reason to linger in a town he plainly found too loud and too close, and he lingered. Took a cot at the back of Hurley's for 2 bits a night. And he began, in the unhurried way he did everything, to be around. Splitting wood behind the mercantile for the widow Hale, who couldn't pay him and whom he wouldn't let refuse. Mending the church steps. Sitting on the bench outside the general store of an afternoon, whittling, saying nothing, missing nothing. And from that bench a man could see the freight office, could see who came and went, could see Della Tanner cross the street on her errands. He never once approached her. That's what I want you to understand because it matters to everything after. He never spoke to her, never tipped his hat in a way that asked for anything, never did a single thing a suspicious husband could point at. He just made himself present. A large, quiet, watchful presence in a town that had, for 11 years, looked the other way. And Della, I watched this happen over about 10 days, Della began to notice she was noticed. The first time she crossed his line of sight and caught him not looking away, she flinched, like a struck horse, dropped her eyes and hurried on. She'd learned that being seen was dangerous. Every seen thing about her had been used against her. The second time, a few days on, she slowed, just a hitch in her step, confused, maybe, that the seeing didn't come with a demand attached. The third time, and I happened to be crossing to the Antler for my supper and saw the whole of it, the third time she stopped, just for a breath. She was on the boardwalk with her basket and he was on his bench with his knife and his stick, and their eyes met across maybe 30 feet of frozen street, and he did the smallest thing. He nodded. Not a hello, not a come here, just a nod that said, near as I can put it into words, I see you. I know. You're not making it up and you're not alone in knowing. And Della Tanner, in the middle of Coldwater's Main Street in the cold, put her hand up over her mouth for just a second like something had broke loose in her, and then got herself in hand and walked on. I wrote in my book that night, something is happening. God help me, I don't know if it's a mercy or the start of a killing. Now here I have to tell about Della's own doing, because if I make this a story about a mountain man saving a helpless woman, I've told it wrong, and I've cheated her. And she deserves better than to be a thing rescued. Della Tanner was not helpless. She was trapped, which is a different thing entirely. A trapped creature isn't weak. It's smart enough to know the trap is real, strong enough to have survived it this long, and it stops fighting the jaws not because it's beaten, but because it's learned that thrashing only cuts deeper. What looks like giving up is often just a body doing the terrible arithmetic of survival, over and over, and coming up every time with the same answer. Stay small, stay quiet, stay alive. Della had been doing that arithmetic for 11 years. And here is the thing I learned, the thing that shames me and lifts me both. She had never stopped underneath, keeping a little ledger of her own. I found this out later, but I'll tell it now so you'll see her right. She'd been squirreling coin. Years of it. A penny here from the grocery change, a nickel there Royce didn't count, hidden I'll not say where, for it's her secret still and she may need it again. Not enough to run on. Never enough. But she kept adding to it anyway, faithful as prayer, because as long as the little hoard grew there was a someday in her life, and a woman can survive an unbearable now if she can keep one thin thread of someday. And she'd been watching the freight schedules, memorizing which teamster ran which route, which stage left when, which road went where. Not planning exactly, she didn't dare plan, planning was hope and hope was dangerous. Just knowing. Keeping the map of escape folded up small inside her in case a day ever came she could use it. That's not helplessness. That's a soldier holding a line for 11 years with no relief coming and no orders to retreat, holding it anyway, because holding it is the only ground she's got. What Ansel gave her, what that nod across the frozen street gave her wasn't rescue. It was witness. And it turns out that after enough years of being told, in 100 small ways, that the trap isn't real and the pain isn't happening and you're imagining it and it's your own fault, after enough of that, one person looking at you and saying, no, I see it, it's real, and it's not your doing can crack something open that all your own private strength never could. Because the hardest part of the trap wasn't the jaws. It was being told, every day, that there were no jaws. The cold broke, briefly, in the 3rd week of February, a false thaw, the kind that comes to fool you before the worst of winter's still to come. And in that thaw 2 things happened close together. The first, Royce Tanner noticed the mountain man. He wasn't a fool, Royce. Cruel men often aren't. The cruelty makes them watchful, forever scanning for threats to the thing they own. He'd have marked the stranger who wouldn't leave, the big quiet trapper who took a bench with a view of the freight office and stayed on it. And Royce would have done his own arithmetic and come up wrong, the way his kind do. He'd have figured a man interested in the office was a man interested in the business, a rival maybe, or figured a man is only ever interested in a thing he wants to take. I saw Royce brace him. Saturday, outside the Antler, Royce with 2 of his teamsters at his back and drink in him and that hard handshake hardiness gone brittle. He said something to Ansel I didn't catch. Loud, meant to be seen, Royce always played to a crowd. Something about strangers and their business and Coldwater not needing either. And Ansel stood up off that bench. The street got quiet. Ansel wasn't taller than Royce, I said, but standing he was more, and there was in the way he rose no threat and no fear either, just a kind of geological patience, a boulder taking note of a man shouting at it. He looked at Royce a long moment with those pale, far-seeing eyes. And then he said, quiet, so the crowd had to lean to hear, which meant they leaned, which meant everyone heard. I know what you are. 4 words, not a threat, a fact, set down in the street the same way he'd set down her man do that in my livery. And then he sat back down and took up his knife and his stick and went on whittling as if Royce Tanner had already left. And Royce, I watched it, Royce went white, then red, and for 1 second there was on his handsome jaw the exact look I'd seen on his horses, the flinch, the look of a thing that has always been the one who frightens, suddenly, briefly, frightened. Then he covered it with a laugh and a slur and turned it into a joke for his teamsters and walked off. But the look had been there. I'd seen it. And a man like Royce Tanner will never, ever forgive being made to feel that look. Not for a single second, in front of a town. I knew then it was going to get worse before it got better. Men like Royce don't get gentler when they're afraid. They get worse, because the fear needs somewhere to go, and it goes toward whatever's smallest and closest and can't hit back. Which meant it went home. That was the second thing that happened in the thaw, and I didn't see it, thank God, but I saw the after of it, and the after was bad. She came to the livery Thursday morning for the geldings, finally ready, and she'd worn the blue coat and a scarf, and her face was arranged into the careful nothing she wore over the world. But she moved wrong. Slow and held to one side, the way a body moves around a hurt in the ribs, and when she reached up for the lead line, that old habit, some hair off her face, The sleeve slid and there was fresh over old on that wrist now, purple-black, and I heard her breath catch when the pull of the lead rope tugged it. And this time, I don't fully know what got into me, except maybe it was every entry in 11 years of a book I'd let run too long. I said low, so it stayed between us, "Mrs. Tanner, Della." First time I'd ever used her Christian name. "You don't have to take these horses back to him this minute." She went still. The careful nothing on her face trembled at the edges. "There's the storeroom," I said, fool that I am, meaning nothing, meaning everything, meaning only that I couldn't watch her walk back into it one more time and say nothing one more time and write coward in my book one more night. "There's coffee on. You could sit. A minute. Warm up. No hurry on the horses." For a moment I thought I'd broken it, the thing she held, the full cup carried so careful all these years. Her eyes filled. Her mouth worked. And she said, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in a decade, a voice with the careful pitch gone right out of it, "If I sit down, Mr. Kettle, I don't know that I'll be able to get back up. And I have to get back up. So please." Please, meaning, don't be kind to me right now. I can't afford your kindness. Kindness is a thing I've had to learn to survive without, and if you show it to me now it'll cost more than I've got. And then, God as my witness, from the doorway, quiet as the light, "You don't got to get back up." Ansel, come for his mule or come because he'd taken to knowing where she was, I never asked, standing in the gray with the thaw dripping off the eaves behind him. And he said it again, gentle as I ever heard a big man say anything. "You don't got to get back up. Not this time." Della Tanner stood between us in the smell of hay and hot iron and cold mud, one hand on a gelding's lead and one wrist gone black, and I watched 11 years of arithmetic run behind her eyes, all the stay small, stay quiet, stay alive, run, and for the first time come up with a different sum. I watched her set the lead line down, slow, like it weighed 100 pounds. Like setting it down was the hardest single thing she'd ever done, harder than any blow she'd taken, because taking a blow you've got no choice in, and setting down the rope is a choice. And she hadn't been let make a choice in so long she'd near forgot she was a person who could. She set the lead line down. And that's where I have to stop part one, because what came Thursday night came fast and came hard, and it deserves its own telling, and my hand's not steady enough tonight to write it all at once. But she set the lead line down. After 11 years, in my livery, in the mud and the thaw, Della Tanner set the rope down and did not pick it back up. And somewhere across town, Royce Tanner was waiting for his geldings and his wife, and neither one was coming. Here is a thing about the moment a trapped creature finally pulls free. It is not the safe part. It is the most dangerous part. The trap does the worst of its damage in the pulling loose. Della sat in my storeroom on an upturned crate with a tin cup of coffee she didn't drink, both hands around it for the warmth, and she shook. Not crying. Past crying. Just a fine, steady tremble all through her, the shake of a body that has held itself rigid for 11 years and doesn't quite know how to stop. Ansel stood in the storeroom doorway, not near her, never crowding, always leaving her a clear way to the door. I noticed that. He always left her a way out, and I stood not knowing what to do with my hands, so I did what I do, which is I picked up my book, though I didn't write. Just held it. Like a preacher holds the book for the ballast of it. "He'll come here," Della said finally. Quiet, but the careful pitch was gone and it didn't come back. "When the geldings don't come and I don't come, he'll come looking and he'll start here because this is where the horses were." She looked up at me and her eyes were terrible and clear. "I've made trouble for you, Mr. Kettle. I'm sorry for it. I'll go before he." "You'll go nowhere," I said, surprising myself. "Not toward him." "There's no away from him," she said, and it wasn't self-pity. It was just the map she'd been living inside 11 years. "That's the thing nobody understands. There's no away. He owns the freight, he owns the roads, every teamster on the pass drinks with him. I've watched the schedules for years, Mr. Kettle. I know every way out of this valley, and I know he can put a man on every one of them by nightfall with a word. A woman alone on foot in February, she shook her head. I've done the arithmetic. I've done it 1,000 nights. It never comes out. And here Ansel spoke from the door. You ain't on foot, he said, and you ain't alone, and you ain't talkin' a road. She looked at him. There's no road up my way, he said. That's why I'm up my way. Trap line runs the high country clear over the divide, comes down the far side at Miller's Bend, 40 mile from here, and not a soul between knows Royce Tanner from Adam. I know every foot of it in the dark. He can watch every road in this valley till spring, and it won't matter, 'cause I ain't talkin' a road. A pause. Then gentler. Snow's comin' back tonight. Hard by the smell. Cover our track inside an hour. He can't follow what ain't there. It was, I understood slowly, a plan. Ansel had had it for days, maybe since the afternoon he first said her man do that. All that quiet lingering, all that whittling on the bench, he'd been building it in his head the way he built everything, careful, complete, saying nothing till it was done. He'd worked out the whole of it, the high route, the weather, Miller's Bend. He'd only been waiting for her to set the rope down first, because, and this is the whole measure of the man, he would not take her out of one prison without her choosing the door herself. He'd not carry her off. He'd only walk beside her if she walked. Della looked between us, and I watched her do the arithmetic one more time, the new numbers this time, and I watched her not trust it. Of course she didn't. Trust had been beaten out of her along with everything else. Why, she said to Ansel, just that. Why would a stranger do this? What did he want? What would it cost, because everything had always cost? And Ansel thought about it genuine, the way he thought about everything, taking his time. Had a sister, he said at last, and that was all. He didn't finish it, he didn't have to. The unfinished thing hung in the storeroom and filled it, and I understood that this quiet man off the mountain had a whole life of grief up there in the snow with him, and that some of the distance in those far-seeing eyes was the distance of a thing he'd been too late to stop once, long ago, and had come down off his mountain 3 times a winter for 6 years, and never found a reason to stay in a town, until he'd walked into my livery and seen a bruise on a woman's wrist and known, finally, what he'd come down the mountain for. Had a sister, he said again, softer, and let it lie. Della set down the coffee. Her hands had stopped shaking. When, she said. Now, said Ansel, while it's light enough to climb and dark's common to cover us. He looked at her steady. You got anything you can't leave, it's now or it's never, and I'd counsel never. A thing you go back for is a thing that gets you caught. And Della Tanner smiled. First real one I'd seen on her in years, a small, fierce, wet-eyed thing. There's a loose brick, she said, behind the freight office stove. I don't need to go home for it. I've never once kept it at home. And I understood she meant her hoard, her 11 years of squirreled pennies, her thread of someday, and that even in the depths of it she'd been too smart, too strong to keep her one hope where he could find it. She'd hidden her future in his own office, under his own stove, and warmed her hands at the fire above it every winter, and he'd never known. I have never in my life been prouder of another human soul than I was of Della Tanner in that moment, and she'll never know it, because I never found the words, and now I'm an old man telling it to strangers by a dying fire. They needed the hoard. 40 miles is far, and Miller's Bend is only the start of far. She'd need coin at the other end to buy the next mile and the mile after. So we had to get to the loose brick behind the freight office stove, which meant we had to get into the freight office, which meant one of us had to walk into the middle of Royce Tanner's own ground in the last light of a February afternoon. And that one was me. Now understand, I'm an old man and no fighter, and I'd spent 11 years being a coward on this exact subject, and I want to be honest that I was afraid nearly to sickness. But I'll tell you the truth of why I went, because it wasn't courage, not the clean kind. It was the book. It was 11 years of did nothing and 1 night of coward, underlined twice. It was a debt so long overdue I'd have paid it with my life to close the page. The plan was simple, which is why it might work. I'd go to the freight office on ordinary business. I'd every reason to. Royce owed me for a season of shoeing, and I'd every right to come collect. and me coming to dun him for money was the most natural thing in the world, the last thing to raise a suspicion. And while Royce or his clerk went to the strongbox for my coin, I'd find a moment at the stove. It near didn't work. Royce was there and he was in a black humor. The geldings hadn't come, Della hadn't come, and he was already an ugly kind of restless, packing, snapping at his clerk. He saw me and his face did something unpleasant. "Kettle, where's my wife and my horses?" And God help me, I lied. Old coward Amos Kettle, who'd never had the sand to say a true word to this man in 11 years, stood in his office and lied to his face smooth as cream. "Horses took lame near 4, both of 'em," I said, sorrowful. "Split hooves, this thawin' freeze, worst I've seen. Won't be sound to travel 2, 3 days. Sent your missus on home an hour past, she said she'd walk, wanted the air." I shook my head at the shame of the split hooves. "Come to tell you, and to settle up the season while I'm at it, if it's convenient." It bought me my minute. He cursed the horses and the thaw and stumped off to the strongbox in the back with the clerk to make my coin, still cursing, and I was at the stove, and the brick, and it came loose in my hand slick and easy from years of her working it, and inside was a little oilcloth roll heavier than you'd think, and I had it up my coat and the brick back in the wall before he'd counted out the second dollar. I don't know that I've ever done a braver thing or a more crooked one, and it sits in my book to this day in a column I made new, one I'd never needed before, marked simply, "Debts I was glad to pay." I gave Royce a civil good night. I even shook his hard hand, and I walked out of that office with his wife's whole future in an oilcloth roll against my ribs, and the snow was already starting, fat and fast and silent, just like Ansel said, and I have never in my life been so glad to see weather come. They left at the edge of dark, from the mouth of the alley behind my livery, where the town gives out to the aspens and the aspens give out to the mountain. Ansel had his mule packed light and quick. He'd done it in the time I was gone and done it right, the way a man packs who's crossed 40 miles of winter more times than he can count. Blankets, powder, the little food a man carries who expects to make the rest of his food from the country. He'd got Della into a spare coat of his own, vast on her, and a wool cap, and she looked less like a runaway wife than a small second trapper, which was the point. He handed her a stick to walk with and showed her, quick and quiet, how to set her feet in his tracks so they'd be one man's trail, not two. And even that little care undid me. He'd thought of everything. The great, slow, thorough heart of him had thought of everything. The snow was coming hard now. The town lamps were going smeared and gold behind it. It was, Ansel had judged exactly right, the perfect murdering cold in which no sane pursuer would ride, and inside which a track died in minutes. Della came to me before they went. She took the oilcloth roll from me and held it a second like it was a live thing, her whole someday made real and heavy in her 2 hands. And then she did a thing I did not expect. She took my old scarred farrier's hand in her free one, the wrist above it still black, I could see it in the lamplight, and she pressed something into my palm and closed my fingers over it. "A penny, 1 penny worn smooth." "The first one," she said, "the very first one I ever saved, 11 years ago. I want you to keep it in your book, Mr. Kettle. I've watched you write in that book my whole married life, and I never knew what it was, but I always thought a man who keeps accounts that careful is keeping them for a reason." Her eyes were streaming now, and she was smiling through it and not wiping either away. "Mark my account paid. Whatever it says on my page, mark it paid in full." I couldn't speak. I'm not ashamed to say it. Old men cry easier than young ones. We've more to cry about and less pride left to stop us. I closed my hand on that penny and I nodded, and it was the only true and finished thing I did in that whole long shameful winter, that nod, and it had to stand for everything I couldn't say. Ansel touched her shoulder once light, "Time." She turned to go, turned back. "You'll not tell him which way," she said, not a plea. She was past pleas, just checking her line one last time, the soldier she was. "I'll tell him you walked east down the pass road," I said, loud if he asks. "I'll tell the whole town east, so there's 50 of 'em to tell him east." which was the opposite of the mountain, which was west and up. By the time he's satisfied you're not east, you'll be over the divide and gone. She looked at me one more moment, and I saw her put me in her book, wherever she kept it, on the good side of the page. Then she set her stick, and set her feet in Ansel's tracks, and the two of them walked up into the aspens, and the snow took them. Not slow and sad the way it happens in songs, but quick, the way it truly happens. 3 steps and they were gray shapes, and 5 steps and they were gone, just gone, swallowed whole by the white and the dark, and the snow already filling the prints behind them, so that inside 2 minutes there was no sign at all that anyone had ever stood at the mouth of that alley, or ever left, or ever been saved. I stood there till the cold drove me in. Royce Tanner did come, of course. Not that night. The storm kept even his rage indoors, but the next day and the next, and for weeks. He raged. He rode the pass road east with his teamsters hard, the way I'd hoped he would, wearing his horses out on the wrong direction. He offered coin for word of her. He came to my livery with his hard hands and his handsome jaw and his eyes gone to something worse than mean, and he stood too close and asked me his questions, and I looked that man in the face. I who'd been a coward 11 years, and I lied to him again, calm as Sunday, and I did it well, and he believed me because a man like Royce can't imagine that a nothing old livery man would dare deceive him, that arrogance being the very hole in his fence that Della slipped through. He never found her. The high route over the divide is a thing you have to be shown or die learning, and there was no one to show him. And by the time the passes cleared in spring, the trail was 6 weeks cold and 40 miles long and led, so far as anyone in Coldwater could ever tell him, nowhere at all. He left Coldwater that summer, sold the freight line and went, restless and ruined in his temper, chasing his lost property somewhere I never heard. Good riddance is too small a phrase. I hope every road he took after was long and every night of it cold. I got one word, one in all the years since. The next February, a full year on, a teamster come up from the railhead brought me a small package with no name on the sender's line, mailed from a town 400 miles off that I'd never heard of and won't name here. Inside was a jar of honey, the pale kind that comes from high mountain flowers, and a scrap of paper, and on the paper, in a careful hand, 2 words and nothing else. Still up. That's all, still up. Meaning, I got back up after all. Meaning, the woman who told me in my storeroom that if she sat down she'd never rise, she rose, she's up. She's living somewhere high and far with honey enough to spare and a hand steady enough to write, and she remembered, a whole year and 400 miles on, to tell the old coward, who finally wasn't one, that she was all right. I don't know if Ansel's still with her. I like to think so. I like to think the great quiet man off the mountain finally found a reason to stay in one place, and that the reason planted roses somewhere nobody could dig them up. But I don't know. Some things you don't get to know. You just get the honey and the 2 words, and you make of them what hope you can. I keep her penny in my book still, the very first one she ever saved. It's there on her page, and under it, in the last entry I ever made on her account, I wrote what she asked me to write, and I underlined it, the only other time in my life I've underlined a thing, and this time it was joy that did it, not shame. Paid in full. I'm an old man now. The forge is cold more days than not. The hands don't hold the iron like they did. But on winter nights I still sit by the stove with my book, and sometimes I take out the worn penny and turn it in my fingers, and I think about how a whole town kept its little ledgers and let a debt run 11 years, and how it took a man who'd quit talking and a woman who'd quit hopping and one coward who finally. Well, the fire's low. I've told it now, the part I never told a soul. I hope wherever she is, the honey's sweet and the snow stays soft, and no one ever again.